And welcome back. It's all about the money, and the new development bank, more commonly known as the BRICS Bank, has been in the spotlight recently. Now, the Vice President and Chief Financial Officer of the bank is in South Africa, and he joins me now. Welcome, Leslie Maasdorp.
Thanks for having me.
So it's been a while since we last chatted, but firstly, you are in the country. Is there any specific reason for that at this point?
Sure. So you'll recall about a month ago, the President had an investment summit. I was here with my colleague who's in charge of operations, and we made some commitments at the President's summit. And as you know, the summit was really all about stimulating investment in the economy. South African economy, as you know, is not growing at the moment, and investment is a key driver of that growth. And infrastructure plays a very important role in that sense. So we have now, because of that commitment, we have pledged that up to $2 billion will be devoted to South Africa next year. So there's a whole range of activities now to inject momentum into our program for 2019. One of the things we're doing is to also raise a local bond. So we are now engaging with the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, with the regulators here, to raise funding in the domestic market by doing an inward listing on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. But we're also using this time to speak to state-owned enterprises, to speak to various government departments, to speak to private sector players who we could co-invest with for infrastructure.
Now, the BRICS Bank is basically invested in equally by all the BRICS partners. So how much is each one investing at this stage?
Yeah. So each country, as you might recall, put in $2 billion into the bank as their equity, right? So the bank is therefore equally owned 20% by the 5 countries. So over time, as we grow, the bank's character will reflect that equal participation. At this stage, I would say that China and India dominate our loan portfolio, and that's mainly because China and India are such large economies and they've got major infrastructure investment programs. But we are now working around the clock to ensure that the portfolio becomes more balanced. But for that $2 billion that South Africa is putting into the bank, for 2019 alone, we are committing $2 billion. So over the next number of years, we will see a significant return from our taxpayers' money that we have invested in the bank.
Now, that's what I want to talk about, because what is that return in terms of projects, major infrastructure projects that this bank has already funded in South Africa? Are there any, and what are they?
Yeah. So as I was saying earlier on, most of our investments, most of our loans rather, in the first phase of our work has been to the government and to state-owned enterprises. State-owned enterprises because they are really the conduits for the infrastructure investment. I'll give you one concrete example. The Port of Durban is part of, or ports are really is part of Transnet. And the Port of Durban is the key port in South Africa through which our imports and exports go. There's been attempts for years now to increase the capacity of that port. So one of our loans in this year, for example, is a $200 million loan to Transnet to upgrade and expand the Port of Durban. And that will stimulate economic growth because there'll be more throughput, more imports, more exports. So that can show you how directly what we do contributes to the South African economy's growth.
You're saying $200 million was $200 million, but wasn't the initial ask there $500 million for that particular project?
So typically, when we invest in large infrastructure projects, one of the ways in which banks de-risk themselves is to only partially fund the project. You are correct that the project is much bigger. Our component is $200 million. Most of these infrastructure projects are quite large. They're multi-year projects, and typically there'll be other banks involved, commercial banks, some of the local banks, as well as Africa Development Bank. And we'll be doing other projects as well. For example, water will be a key focus in 2019. As you know, South Africa is a water-scarce country. A lot of people assume that our problems have now disappeared because the water restrictions are not as severe as they were. But we are a water-scarce country and we need long-term plans to deal with that challenge.
But I just want to get back to the Durban harbour, because there were reports that the reason why it was rejected in the first instance was that at $500 million it was overpriced, according to the BRICS Bank. Is that true?
That is not true. The project has always been, from day one, when Transnet put forward the expansion of the Port of Durban, we were very enthusiastic about supporting the project. Look, the project has been going on for a while. It has now been concluded. The loan is approved, but we haven't started disbursement yet. So over the next year and a half, that process will be done.
All right. And of course, we will keep an eye on those investments and these developments, because there is, of course, a school of thought that says that we are not getting sufficient return on investment from the BRICS Bank, given that we are an equal partner. But as Leslie Maasdorp says, there are plans afoot to actually invest in some of our infrastructure development programs. So we will keep our eye on those developments. And thanks to the new development bank, more commonly known as the BRICS Bank Vice President Leslie Maasdorp, for joining us this morning. Let's take a break.